I discovered that the man I loved for 35 years lived a lie so deep that even the dead were part of it. And yet, I found the strength to start over at 67. Good morning, my name is Dorothy Parker. I'm 78 years old today, but my story begins much earlier. If you're watching this video, I want you to know that behind these wrinkles is a woman who learned it's never too late for truth or for a fresh start. Before I continue my story, I'd like to ask you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It helps me a lot to continue sharing stories like this one. I was born in 1947 in Pine Creek Valley, a town so small it barely showed up on maps. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, where gossip traveled faster than rainwater in a gutter. My family was simple. My father worked in construction. My mother took care of me and my 4 siblings. From an early age, I learned what it meant to be a woman in those days. Obey, take care of the house, prepare to be a wife and mother. It was at a church fair in 1962 that I met Gerald. I was 15, wearing a blue dress sewn by my mother, and he was 20, all elegant in his starched white shirt. Gerald wasn't like the other boys in town. He worked at the only pharmacy in Pine Creek, could read and write very well, and talked in a way that made any girl sigh. When he smiled at me, I felt butterflies in my stomach. The courtship followed tradition, always with my parents nearby, meetings in the square after Sunday Mass, conversations about the future. He told me about his plans to buy the pharmacy one day, to build a good life. And I dreamed of a house full of children, with curtains I would make myself, with the smell of cake coming from the oven when he returned from work. We married in 1964. I was 17. He was 22. Our celebration was simple in the parish hall, with cake made by my Aunt Zelda and music played by a band from the neighboring town. I remember my white dress that had been my mother's, adjusted by the local seamstress. Gerald looked so handsome in his black suit, the only one he owned. On our wedding night, I was so nervous I could barely look him in the eye. My mother had only told me, "Be a good wife, Dorothy. Do what your husband asks." Our first house was small, just 2 rooms that we built gradually. Each brick laid was a promise for the future. Soon came the children. Teresa in 1965, Joshua in 1967, and Martha in 1970. Life was hard, but it was happy, or at least, that's what I believed. Gerald prospered at the pharmacy. He was respected in town, invited to all the important meetings. In 1972, he managed to buy the pharmacy from old Mr. Johnson. He worked hard Monday through Saturday, sometimes until late, but there was a constant in our life, something as regular as the church bell. Every Sunday, Gerald would go fishing with his friend Gregory. I remember it as if it were yesterday. He would wake up when it was still dark, make strong coffee, grab his fishing rod, his tackle box, and a packed lunch that I had prepared the night before. "I'll be back before dinner, Dottie," he would say, giving me a kiss on the forehead. Dottie, that's what he called me, an affectionate nickname that only he used. Gregory was a mystery to me. I never really knew him. Gerald said he lived in the neighboring town, Riverdale, about 30 miles away. Once I asked why Gregory never came to our house, and Gerald explained that his wife was very reserved, didn't like visits. Big city people, he would say, and I accepted it. Sundays without Gerald became my routine. I would wake up, get the children ready for church, then prepare a special lunch. In the afternoon, I would take the children to play in the park or visit my sisters. When the sun started to set, I would wait by the window. Sometimes Gerald would arrive with a few fish, telling animated stories about the fishing trip. "You should have seen the size of the bass Gregory caught, Dottie. Almost broke the line." Other times he would return empty-handed. The fish weren't biting today. There were small things, details that now, looking back, should have alerted me. The different smell on his clothes, which wasn't just river or campfire smoke. The occasional gifts he brought, found at a little market by the river. Delicate scarves, homemade candies, small ornaments, the fishing stories that always seemed the same, as if told from a script. But I didn't question it. I was raised to trust my husband. not to ask questions. A proper woman doesn't question her husband. My mother always said, a man needs his time, his freedom. And it wasn't just my mother, it was what all women of my time learned. So I smiled, kept the gifts with care, fried the fish he brought, and thanked God for having a hard-working husband who only asked for one day to himself. Once, in 1978, I think, I found a receipt in his shirt pocket when I was doing laundry. It was from a restaurant in Riverdale, dated on a Sunday. When I asked, he answered without hesitation. Oh, Gregory and I had lunch there after fishing. It was raining too hard to make a campfire. The explanation made sense, and I didn't think about it again. On another occasion, Mrs. Jenkins, our most gossipy neighbor, came to tell me she had seen Gerald in Riverdale on Sunday, but not fishing. He was holding hands with a woman in the central square, she said. I defended my husband tooth and nail. Imagine that, Mrs. Jenkins. You must have confused him. My Gerald was fishing with Gregory, as he does every Sunday. You know how faithful he is to that tradition? And I truly believed it. After all, why would I doubt? We had a good life together. He was a good father, a good provider. I never wanted for anything. The years passed. Our children grew up. Teresa got married in 1985 to a young man from the capital. Joshua went to study engineering in New York. Martha stayed closer, married the mayor's son, and settled in the neighboring town. The house became emptier, quieter. Gerald and I grew old together. In 1988, I started managing a small market in the center of town, something to keep me occupied now that the children had followed their paths. And every Sunday, without fail, Gerald continued going fishing with Gregory. In 1997, after 33 years together, the unexpected happened. It was a Sunday like any other. Gerald left early to go fishing, as he always did, but returned earlier, shortly after noon, pale, sweating cold, with his hand on his chest. I don't feel well, Dottie, he said, barely able to speak. I called for help immediately. The ambulance took forever to arrive in those days. At the hospital in the neighboring town, the doctors did what they could, but it was a serious heart attack. In the ICU, I held his hand, praying to all the saints I knew. Gerald opened his eyes one last time and murmured something that at the time I didn't understand. Forgive me, Dottie. Gregory is waiting for me. I thought it was the delirium of death, that he was seeing his friend in the next world. Gerald passed away that night, leaving a hole in my heart and many questions I didn't yet know I had. The funeral was as expected in a small town. Everyone attended. The pharmacy closed for 3 days out of respect. I received so many hugs, so many condolences, so many dishes of food that neighbors brought that I barely had room to store them. But there was one notable absence. Gregory, my husband's great fishing buddy, didn't appear. When I mentioned this to Teresa, she suggested, maybe he's traveling, Mom, or sick. Mr. Gregory must be quite elderly, too. I accepted the explanation. There was so much to resolve after Gerald's death. The estate, the pharmacy that ended up being sold, the house suddenly too big for me alone. My children wanted me to come live with one of them, but I refused. This is my home, I told them. Here I lived my life with your father. Here I will stay. It was only 3 months after Gerald's death, when I finally had the courage to organize his things, that my life turned upside down again. On that July day in 1997, 3 months after Gerald's passing, I finally found the courage to go through his things. The wardrobe still held his scent, that mixture of aftershave and pipe tobacco that he occasionally smoked. Each piece of clothing I folded seemed to tell a story, bring a memory. The suit he wore to Teresa's wedding, the blue shirt I bought him for his 50th birthday, the straw hat that never missed the fishing trips. For a moment, I found myself smiling as I imagined Gerald and Gregory sitting by the river, talking about life while waiting for the fish to bite. I imagined the two of them now together at some heavenly river, continuing their eternal friendship. It was with that thought that I decided to organize the garage as well, where Gerald kept his fishing gear. The rod leaning in a corner, the artificial lures in a wooden box, the old rubber boots he used to wade into the river. And it was there, rummaging through dusty shelves, that I found a shoebox hidden behind paint cans. It wasn't just any box. It was tied with string and had the word "Memories" handwritten on the lid. I found it curious that I had never seen that box before in all the years we had been together. I blew off the dust, carefully untied the string, and opened the lid. The contents initially left me confused. There were old photos, yellowed receipts, handwritten cards, a small address book, and some other small objects. I took the first photograph. It showed Gerald very young, perhaps in his mid-20s, next to another man of the same age, both holding fishing rods in front of a small wooden boat. I turned the photo over, and there was an inscription. Me and Gregory, Ohio River, June 1965. My heart skipped a beat. I finally knew the face of the famous Gregory, a thin man with dark hair and a shy smile. I continued looking at the other photos, most of them fishing in different places, always smiling, always friends. But then, I noticed something strange. All the photos were old, showing them both young. There were no recent photos of Gregory. Digging deeper into the box, I found a carefully folded newspaper clipping. It was an obituary from the local Riverdale newspaper, dated July 22, 1965. Yesterday, young Gregory Mendoza Wilson, 25, only son of August and Clemency Wilson, died in a tragic automobile accident on the state highway. He leaves behind his wife, Isabel, 6 months pregnant. I read and reread that piece of paper, unable to comprehend. Gregory died in 1965. But how? Gerald went fishing with him every Sunday for more than 30 years after that. Was it another Gregory? But the dates on the photos, the full name, everything indicated it was the same person. With trembling hands, I continued searching through the box. I found receipts for a small apartment rented in Riverdale, in Gerald's name, dated from 1966 to 1997. Monthly payments for over 30 years. There were also birthday cards, Christmas cards, Father's Day cards, all signed in neat handwriting. With love, Diana and your children. Diana? Who was Diana? At the bottom of the box was a photograph that made my world collapse. It showed Gerald, already with gray hair, it must have been from about 10 years ago, hugging a woman approximately my age and 2 young adults, a man and a woman. On the back of the photo, in the same handwriting as the cards, silver anniversary, me, August, Janet, and Eugene, 1992. August. My husband's name was Gerald, but there, in that other life, he was August. I sat on the dusty garage floor with those fragments of an unknown life scattered before me. The pieces were beginning to fit together, forming an image I never could have imagined. My husband, the man I thought I knew for 33 years, maintained another family and used the memory of a dead friend as an excuse to visit them every Sunday. The tears came hot, mixing with the garage dust. I don't know how long I sat there motionless, trying to process that monumental betrayal. I remembered the Sundays over 3 decades, how I was happy when he returned, how I believed every word about the fishing trips that never happened. How could I have been so blind? I remembered every clue I ignored. The fish he sometimes forgot to bring, the different smell on his clothes, the repetitive stories, the mysterious gifts. And that time, Mrs. Jenkins said she saw him with another woman. She wasn't confused. She was telling the truth. With my heart in pieces, but determined to know the whole truth, I put everything back in the box, except for the most recent receipt for the apartment in Riverdale. It had an address. Oak Street, number 47, apartment 2. The next morning, I put on my best outfit, a navy blue dress I wore to my first grandchild's baptism. I fixed my hair, put on a little lipstick. Looking at myself in the mirror, I saw a 67-year-old woman with eyes swollen from crying so much, but still standing, still strong enough to face the truth. I took the bus to Riverdale with the box of memories in my lap. During the 30-minute journey, I oscillated between anger, sadness, and a strange curiosity. Who was this Diana? What did she know? Was she suffering too, or had Gerald, no, August to her, told different lies to each of us? Riverdale was bigger than Pine Creek, with buildings up to 4 stories high, busier commerce. I walked to the address, a light blue 2-story house on a tree-lined street. Before I could knock on the door, I spotted a woman in the small front garden watering flowers. She must have been my age, gray hair tied in a bun, simple floral dress. My heart raced. Could it be her? "Can I help you?" she asked, seeing me stopped at the gate. I showed her the photo of Gerald that I had brought with me. "Do you know this man?" Her face lit up. "Of course. That's my husband, August. Are you a friend of his? Please come in." August, not Gerald. I entered, holding the box tightly against my chest like a shield. The house was cozy, decorated with simplicity and good taste. On the walls, family photos, Gerald, August, the woman, the 2 children in different phases of life, a parallel life, complete, that existed just 30 miles from mine. She served me coffee in a delicate porcelain cup. "I'm Diana," she introduced herself. "And you? From where do you know my August?" "My name is Dorothy," I replied, my voice firmer than I expected. "And August?" "August was my husband, too." The cup trembled in her hand, spilling coffee on the saucer. For a moment I thought she might faint, but Diana was strong, like me. She straightened her shoulders, placed the cup on the table, and faced me. "What are you saying?" "August and I were married for 32 years. He died 3 months ago of a heart attack." I didn't correct her. "Gerald and I were married for 33 years. And yes, he died 3 months ago of a heart attack on a Sunday." The color drained from her face. "Sunday?" He always went out on Sundays to visit his elderly mother in Pine Creek. He said she was in a nursing home, that she couldn't be moved from there, that she needed him. I opened the box and spread its contents on the living room table. The photos, the receipts, the obituary. I told her about the fishing trips with Gregory, about the friend who had died in 1965, but whom my husband visited every Sunday. As I spoke, I watched Diana's face go through all the emotions I had felt in the garage. Confusion, disbelief, anger, pain. She, in turn, got up and went to a bookshelf. She came back with a photo album. "I met August in 1965. He came to Riverdale for Gregory's funeral, who was his best friend. Gregory was married to my cousin Isabel. At the funeral, August told us he was a pharmaceutical product salesman, that he traveled around the state during the week. We started corresponding. He would visit me when he passed through here. We fell in love. We got married in 1967. He said his work required him to travel Monday through Saturday, but that Sundays would always be ours." As she spoke, she showed photos of the wedding, of the children. Janet, born in 1968, and Eugene in 1970. Photos of birthdays, graduations, always with Gerald. August, present, smiling, living his other life. He always returned home Sunday night, saying he needed to hit the road early Monday. I never suspected. Why would I? He was a good husband, a good father. He worked so hard to give us comfort. We fell into a heavy silence. 2 middle-aged women facing the ruins of lives built on lies. Diana spoke first. "What else was he hiding? Are we sure there were only 2 families?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Indeed, how could we know? The man we loved was capable of maintaining 2 completely separate lives for more than 3 decades. Who could guarantee there wasn't a third, a fourth? We need to search more, I decided. In Pine Creek, at the pharmacy, here we need to know the extent of this. Diana nodded, wiping away tears. "My children can't know yet. This would destroy them. They idolized their father." "Mine too," I agreed. At that moment, something unexpected happened. I looked at that woman, my rival, the other one, and felt no hatred. I saw only another victim, as deceived as I was. Someone who, like me, had dedicated her life to a man who lived divided, who was never completely either of ours. "Would you like to see more photos of him with us?" asked Diana, hesitantly. "Maybe it will help to understand who he really was." I nodded. And so began a surreal afternoon. Two widows of the same man sharing memories, discovering a stranger in common in the subtext of our lives. But what we found next left us even more perplexed. That afternoon in Riverdale, sitting in Diana's living room, the other wife of my husband, I felt as if I were living a strange dream. We spent hours looking at photographs, comparing dates, discovering that while Gerald celebrated our Teresa's 15th birthday, 2 weeks later, August celebrated Janet's high school graduation. Each revealed memory was like a small cut, painful, but necessary. "I want to show you something," said Diana, suddenly getting up. She went to the bedroom and came back with a book bound in brown leather. I found this among his things after the funeral. I had never seen it before. It was a diary. On the first page, in Gerald's or August's unmistakable handwriting, was written, "River Memories, 1965-1997. My heart raced. Would these be records of the supposed fishing trips? We began reading together, page by page, and what we found was beyond anything we could have imagined. It wasn't just a diary of lies. It was the meticulous record of a man divided between two realities. The first entries from 1965 were genuine. Descriptions of real fishing trips with Gregory, conversations about youthful dreams, about the girlfriends they had at the time, me and Diana's cousin. Then came the account of the accident, the pain of losing his friend. Gerald wrote, "Today we buried Gregory. A part of me went with him. How to continue without our Sundays at the river? Who else will listen to my secrets, my fears?" In the following pages, something strange began to happen. The entries continued as if Gregory were still alive. "Today we caught 3 huge bass. Gregory told me about his new job. We talked about politics, about the future of the country." It was as if in the pages of that diary, my husband refused to accept his friend's death. And then, in an entry from 1967, the first mention of Diana. I didn't tell Gregory about Diana. I still don't know how he would react. After all, he was the cousin of Isabel's husband. But when I'm with her, I feel a freedom I've never experienced. With Dottie, I am responsible Gerald, the pharmacist, the family man. With Diana, I can be August, the man I dreamed of being before assuming so many responsibilities, so young. I remember raising my eyes from the diary at that moment and meeting Diana's gaze. There were tears silently running down her face, as well as mine. It wasn't just betrayal we were discovering. It was the complete dissociation of a man who created 2 separate identities, 2 worlds that should never meet. As we advanced through the pages, we saw how he meticulously separated his lives. For Diana and her children, he was August Wilson, pharmaceutical salesman, who traveled the state during the week. For me and my children, he was Gerald Parker, the respected pharmacy owner who reserved only Sundays for his personal leisure. The most disturbing were the entries about Gregory. Even decades after his death, Gerald August continued writing as if his friend were alive, aging along with him, participating in his double life as the only confidant. Today, Gregory said, "I'm going crazy, leading this divided life." Maybe he's right, but how to choose, how to abandon half of myself? In an entry from 1980, he wrote, "Gregory asked today why I don't simply leave one of the families, choose one life definitively. I explained it would be like cutting off an arm or a leg. I love my children, all of them. I love Dottie with her serene devotion. I love Diana with her vibrant joy. They are different parts of my heart. How to live with only half a heart." We read until nightfall, amazed at the complexity of the web of lies and self-deception that Gerald August had built. In the last entries from a few months before his death, we noticed something worrying. He was beginning to confuse the details, mixing his 2 lives. Today, I almost called Diana Dottie. I told Teresa about Janet's graduation before realizing my mistake. Gregory said I won't be able to keep this up much longer. Age is catching up with me. The memories blur. The last entry, written just 3 days before his death, was disturbing. I dreamed I was in heaven and there were no secrets there. Dottie, Diana, my children from both sides all together, knowing everything. In the dream, instead of anger, there was understanding. Would it be possible? Gregory says I'm a fool to still have hope. But I can't help thinking, what if somehow my 2 lives could meet in peace? The pain in my chest hasn't gone away for days. Perhaps it's the weight of so many secrets. We closed the diary in silence. Outside, night had already fallen. Diana turned on the lights in the living room and offered me more coffee, which I accepted automatically, still processing everything we had read. "What do we do now?" she finally asked. A simple question, but so complex. What should 2 middle-aged women, widows of the same man, do with the ruins of lives built on illusions? "First," I replied after a long moment, "we need to check our financial situation. If he lived 2 lives, how did he manage the money?" Diana nodded, already retrieving some folders from a drawer. August said his salary was deposited directly. We always had enough, never luxury, but comfort. He paid the rent for this apartment, the college tuition for the kids. I began to do mental calculations. Gerald's pharmacy was profitable, but not that much. I always thought our standard of living was compatible with his income. But now, if he was supporting 2 families, how was it possible? We examined documents, bank statements, deeds. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Over the years, Gerald had discreetly sold several properties I had inherited from my parents, land in the countryside that I rarely visited. The money financed his second life. On the other hand, he had used part of the pharmacy profits, which should have been our savings for old age, to pay for Eugene's medical school, Diana's son. He stole our future to give to them, I thought bitterly, but didn't say aloud. Because at the same instant I realized he had done the same to Diana, stolen from her to give to us. Neither of us had received what we deserved, just fractions, crumbs of a divided life. It was already past midnight when we decided that I would stay for dinner. It was too late to return to Pine Creek, and we still had so much to discover. Diana prepared a simple soup that we ate in contemplative silence. "We have to tell our children," she said finally. I felt a knot in my stomach. My children adored their father, preserved his memory with affection. How to tell them that the man they considered an example was, in fact, a liar who had led a double life for more than 3 decades? "Maybe we should wait," I suggested. "Discover everything first, understand better." Diana looked at me with an expression that mixed understanding and determination. "Dorothy, we've lived enough lies, don't you think? Our children are adults. They have the right to know the truth about the father they had." Deep down, I knew she was right. More lies, even by omission, would only perpetuate the legacy of falsehood that Gerald had left. We agreed to talk to our children in the coming days, separately, and then decide the next steps. That night, I slept in Diana's guest room, on sheets that smelled of rose fabric softener, so different from mine at home, with the scent of lavender. Small differences that made up 2 lives, 2 families, 2 worlds that should never have met. Before sleeping, I took the diary again and turned to the first pages. There was a loose photo there that we hadn't noticed before. It was of Gerald and Gregory, very young, probably still teenagers, sitting by a river, smiling at the camera. On the back, a handwritten message. "To Gerald, my best friend, may our dreams run free, like this river, always together." From Gregory. Contemplating that photo in the dimness of the unfamiliar room, I felt a strange compassion for the man who had been my husband. What deep wound had Gregory's death caused for him to build such an elaborate fantasy? What emptiness was he trying to fill, living 2 parallel lives? I'm not justifying what he did. The betrayal lasted decades. It was deliberate, calculated, cruel. But that night, for the first time since the discovery, I allowed myself to see beyond the anger and pain. I saw a broken man, unable to integrate the parts of himself, living eternally divided, eternally incomplete. The next morning, we had coffee together, like old friends, not like rivals. There was a strange intimacy between us. After all, who else in the world could understand exactly what we were going through? "What are you going to do?" Diana asked. "After we tell our children, after all this comes out, will you go back to Pine Creek and continue your life?" The question hung between us like smoke. What life did I have to go back to? An empty house? A widowhood based on lies? Neighbors who would always know I had been deceived for decades? "I don't know," I answered honestly. "And you?" Diana looked out the window to the small garden where she tended her flowers. "I don't know either. Janet wants me to go live with her in the capital. Eugene is finishing his medical residency in New York. This apartment has too many memories now." We were silent. Two middle-aged women facing uncertain futures, shaken identities, wounded hearts, but still beating. It was then that Diana said something that would change our lives once more. "You know, I've always wanted to open a small restaurant. Cooking is my passion. August. He always said it was a silly dream, that I should be content being a housewife." I looked at her with sudden interest. Curious, I always wanted to expand the market I manage, transform it into something bigger. Gerald always discouraged me, said it was too much ambition for a woman my age. Our eyes met, a spark of mutual recognition lighting up between us. Had our ambitions, our personal dreams, been threats to the delicate balance of his double life? "I have some money saved," I said slowly, testing an idea that was beginning to form. "Not much, but enough for a fresh start." "I have his life insurance," Diana responded in the same cautious tone, "and my savings from when I gave cooking classes." Another long silence as the idea grew between us, improvised but increasingly solid. "It would be crazy," I murmured finally, "completely insane." "Agreed," Diana said, and then smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her tired face. "But who said we have to be sensible now? We've been sensible all our lives. And see where that got us." At that moment, with the morning sun coming through Diana's kitchen window, something new was born. It wasn't friendship yet. It was too early for that. The wounds were still bleeding. It wasn't exactly hope. We were too realistic for that. It was possibility, the possibility of transforming betrayal into a fresh start, pain into renewal. But before any decision, we had to face the most difficult moment, telling our children, letting the house of cards built by Gerald August completely collapse. And their reaction was nothing like what we expected. Telling the truth to our children was, without a doubt, the hardest part of this whole journey. After that morning at Diana's house, I returned to Pine Creek with a heavy heart, knowing I needed to gather courage to destroy the image my children had of their father. First, I called Teresa. My firstborn was always the most sensitive, the one who most resembled Gerald in her calm temperament and thoughtful way of facing problems. I asked her to visit me over the weekend, saying only that we needed to talk about important matters related to her father's inheritance. Then I called Joshua in New York. My son was always the most distant, not geographically, but emotionally. A brilliant engineer, he built his life far from Pine Creek, returning only on special dates. Even so, he idolized his father. He always said his work ethic came from Gerald. How to tell him that this ethics had a hidden face? Finally, Martha, who lived closer, my youngest, the one most like me, stubborn and practical, married to the former mayor's son, had built a comfortable life in the neighboring town. She was the one who visited me most frequently, bringing the grandchildren to spend weekends with me. Meanwhile, Diana would do the same with Janet and Eugene. We agreed to tell them separately, letting each family process the news in their own way before any possible meeting between the two sides. The weekend arrived too quickly. On Friday night, Teresa was the first to arrive with her husband Robert and their two teenage children. I insisted the children go to bed early, as I needed to talk just with her and Robert. Sitting in the living room with cups of tea that cooled untouched, I told everything. I showed the photos, the receipts, talked about Diana and her children, about the diary, about the double life that Gerald had maintained for 33 years. I'll never forget the expression on my daughter's face. It wasn't just shock or sadness. It was as if something fundamental was breaking inside her. Robert held her hand throughout the account, but when I finished, she released herself from him and walked to the window, staring into the night. "Impossible," was all she said for a long moment. Then turning, "Are you sure, Mom? Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Maybe." Denial is always the first refuge when the truth is unbearable. I showed more evidence, explained more details. Gradually I saw reality settling in her eyes, the painful acceptance. And then what surprised me most? The anger. How could he? Everything he taught us about honesty, about family, about commitment, all lies. Tears streamed down her face. "And you, Mom, how do you feel? How did you bear to discover this?" Her concern for me, even amid her own pain, moved me deeply. I explained that I was still processing everything, that sometimes I felt anger, sometimes sadness, sometimes even a strange relief for finally knowing the truth. On Saturday morning, Joshua arrived, then Martha with her husband. I gathered everyone in the living room and repeated the story, showing the same evidence. The reactions were as different as my children's personalities. Joshua, always analytical, took the diary and began examining it page by page, as if looking for flaws, inconsistencies that could disprove it all. "The handwriting is definitely his," he finally confirmed, closing the book with a heavy sigh. But why? Why go to the trouble of living like this, divided, always lying? Martha was more direct. "That scoundrel!" she exclaimed, pacing back and forth across the room. "Sorry, Mom. I know it's painful to hear, but that's what he was. A scoundrel who deceived you, who deceived all of us. And this other woman, did she know about us?" I explained that Diana had been as deceived as I was, that she thought she was the only wife of a traveling salesman named August. What followed was an intense afternoon, full of questions, tears, moments of charged silence. My children took turns comforting me and processing their own pain. The image of the perfect father was destroyed, and with it, part of their own identities built in relation to him. "What will you do now, Mom?" Teresa finally asked when night began to fall. I hesitated. It was time to tell about the crazy idea that had been born that morning in Diana's kitchen. I decided yes. There would be no more secrets in this family. Actually, Diana and I are considering a partnership. 3 pairs of eyes stared at me in astonishment. I explained our preliminary plan, to combine our resources, my administrative skills, and her culinary talent to open a small restaurant. "The two of you together?" The incredulity in Martha's voice was understandable. "The legitimate wife and the other legitimate wife," I corrected gently. "She has as much right to the title as I do, Martha. It was 32 years, a complete marriage, children, a life built. The only difference is that hers wasn't on paper." "But even so," Joshua intervened, "working together after everything he did, wouldn't it be simpler for each to go her own way, process all this separately?" I reflected on this before answering. Maybe it would be simpler, yes, but also lonelier. You know, when I discovered everything, my first impulse was to hate Diana. But upon meeting her, I realized if there's anyone in the entire world who can understand exactly what I'm going through, it's her. We were deceived by the same man, in the same way, for the same time. And now, at 67, we have the chance to start over, not as rivals, not as victims, but as partners. A thoughtful silence settled in the room. It was Robert, Teresa's husband, who broke it. "I think it's brave, Mrs. Parker, to transform something so negative into something potentially positive." I smiled at him, grateful for the support. My children still seemed skeptical, but didn't directly oppose the idea. I asked them to wait, to give me time to explore this possibility, to see if it was viable. The next morning, I received a call from Diana. Her conversation with her children hadn't been very different from mine. Initial shock, then anger, and finally reluctant acceptance. Janet had cried a lot. Eugene had remained silent for long periods, digesting everything in his way. "I told them about our idea," said Diana. "Eugene thinks I'm crazy. Janet, well, she said if this is what will help me get over everything, she supports me." We exchanged information about our children's reactions and noted how, even being raised in different homes by different parents, there were remarkable similarities in how they processed the grief for the paternal figure they thought they knew. "When can we meet to discuss the details of our plan?" I asked. Part of me still couldn't believe we were actually considering this, but the other part, perhaps the braver one, was already excited about the possibility. We agreed to meet the following Wednesday at the midpoint between our towns. There was a small restaurant by the roadside, the Traveler's Rest, where Gerald had probably never been, a neutral place for us. At the restaurant, we occupied a discreet table in the back and spread out notebooks, calculators, and some recipe books that Diana had brought. Two ladies planning a business, nothing to draw attention from the other customers. "I've thought a lot about this," Diana began. "If we're going to do this, we need to do it right. Not just any restaurant, but something that tells a story, our story, in a way." The idea intrigued me. "What do you mean?" "Well, what united us was fishing, right? Or rather, the lie about fishing. Why not transform this into something positive? A restaurant specializing in fish and seafood." I laughed at the irony, transforming the biggest lie of our life into our brand. There was something poetic about it. "And what about the name?" I asked, curious to see how far this reframing went. Diana smiled, a smile different from the first day, lighter, more genuine. "The Fisherman," she suggested. "Simple, direct. People will think it's just a fish restaurant, but for us, it will have another meaning." "The Fisherman," I repeated, feeling the weight and lightness of the name simultaneously. "I like it. It's appropriate." We spent the following hours discussing practical details. Location. A midpoint between the two towns seemed ideal. Initial investment, division of responsibilities. Diana would be responsible for the kitchen, I for the administration. Our target audience would be families and travelers who passed along the highway connecting the larger cities in the region. As we talked, I realized how complementary we were in our skills and personalities. Where I was cautious, she was bold. Where she was dreamy, I was practical. It was as if Gerald August had sought different parts of himself in each of us. And now, ironically, those parts were coming together to create something new. "We're going to need our children's help," I commented, thinking of my children's initial reactions. "At least in the beginning, until we establish everything." "Janet has already offered to help on weekends," Diana replied. "And you? Do your children support?" "They're skeptical, but don't oppose. Joshua can help with the financial part. He understands investments. Teresa is a teacher, but during school vacations, she could give us a hand. Martha," I hesitated, thinking of my most tempestuous daughter. "Martha will need more time. She was very close to her father." Diana nodded understandingly. Eugene also idolized his father. He wanted to be like him. He's having difficulty reconciling the man he knew with all this. More silence, this time contemplative. We were embarking on an uncertain journey, based on a connection forged in pain. Was it unwise? Probably. But at 67, after discovering that the life I thought I had lived was partially an illusion, what did it mean to be wise? "We have to make this work," I finally said. "Not just for the business itself, but for ourselves, to prove that we can rebuild something from the ashes he left." "To prove that we are more than the wives he deceived," Diana agreed. "That we have value for ourselves, our own identities beyond him." At that moment, we sealed not just a business partnership, but a pact of rebirth. Two women who conventionally should have been enemies, united by extraordinary circumstances to create something entirely new. The following weeks were of intense work. We found a small building for sale exactly halfway between Pine Creek and Riverdale. It had been a warehouse before, needed renovations, but the price was affordable and the location perfect. To our surprise, when we told our children about the chosen location, the initial resistance began to yield. Joshua offered to supervise the renovation, using his engineering knowledge. Teresa helped with the decoration. Martha, despite her reservations, introduced us to a reliable accountant. On Diana's side, Janet contributed by designing the menu and the restaurant's logo. Eugene, even busy with his medical residency, sent money to help purchase equipment for the kitchen. The most surprising was what happened when our children finally met. We had feared this moment, imagined tension, resentment. Instead, there was a strange, immediate connection, the mutual recognition of something familiar in each other's faces. Traits of Gerald August in each one, mannerisms, expressions they had inherited without knowing. "It's strange," Teresa commented after meeting Eugene. "It's as if he were the brother I never knew I had, and in a way, that's exactly what he is." There were months of intense work, of discoveries, of adjustments. Not everything was easy, of course. There were moments of tension between Diana and me, discussions about how to manage certain aspects of the business. There were days when the anger for everything Gerald had done resurged strongly, when we questioned whether we weren't crazy for trying to build something together. But there were also moments of unexpected connection, like when we discovered we both had the same favorite movie from the 60s, or when we realized that both she and I had the habit of singing while cooking, different songs, different voices, but the same habit that made Gerald smile in two different houses. Finally, in early 1998, just 10 months after Gerald August's death, we inaugurated the Fisherman. The restaurant was modest but cozy, with decor that referenced the river and fishing, reframing the lie that had united our stories. And on opening day, something happened that neither of us had foreseen, something that would reveal yet another piece of the puzzle that was the life of the man we knew by different names. It was March 15th, 1998, a sunny Sunday, a date we purposely chose for the inauguration of the Fisherman. Sunday, the day that for so long represented the division in our lives, would now be the day of our union. We prepared everything with care. Diana commanded the kitchen with the help of 2 young assistants hired from the region. I managed the dining room with Teresa and Janet helping with the service. Martha handled the cash register, still reluctant, but present. Joshua and Teresa's husband organized the improvised parking lot, where more cars than we expected were already gathering. The restaurant, small but cozy, had a decor that evoked the river and fishing, without being excessive. Old photographs of local fishermen decorated the walls. None of Gerald or Gregory, of course. In the center of the main room, a round aquarium with colorful fish was the element that most caught attention. "Nervous?" Diana asked me, briefly leaving the kitchen to check the movement. In 10 months of coexistence, we had developed our own dynamic, not exactly intimate friendship, but a partnership of deep mutual respect. "A little," I admitted, "but it's a good nervousness, of expectation." She squeezed my arm lightly before returning to the kitchen. That simple gesture said a lot about our journey, from the initial distrust to the ability to comfort each other in moments of anxiety. The inaugural lunch exceeded our expectations. The food was impeccable. The grilled halibut with herbs, Diana's specialty, was particularly praised. The service, despite some inevitable initial hiccups, flowed well. People from both towns attended, attracted by the novelty and the word of mouth that our children had spread. It was around 3 in the afternoon, when the crowd began to thin, that it happened. An elderly gentleman, leaning on a cane, entered the restaurant alone. He must have been in his 80s, hair completely white, but still with an upright posture, lively and attentive eyes. He was dressed with simple elegance, slacks, a well-ironed shirt, a hat that he removed upon entering. I went to greet him personally, thinking he was just another curious customer. "Table for one?" I asked with my best hostess smile. He studied me for a moment, as if evaluating me. Mrs. Dorothy Parker? He asked, with a surprisingly firm voice for his age. I was momentarily disconcerted. Yes, that's me. Do we know each other? Not personally, he replied, but I know your story. Or rather, I know the story of the man who united us in ways we never imagined. A chill ran down my spine. Who was this man? How did he know Gerald? I asked one of the young waiters to take my place and led the gentleman to a more secluded table in the back of the restaurant. Who are you, sir? I asked as soon as we sat down. My name is August Mendoza Wilson, he replied, Gregory's father. I felt the blood drain from my face. The father of Gregory, the real Gregory who died in 1965. But he should be. I made a quick calculation. If Gregory was 25 when he died, and that was 33 years ago, his father should be at least 80 years old now. The age matched. How? How did you know about us? I managed to ask. The obituary, he answered simply. I saw the name Gerald Parker in the newspaper when he passed away. I wasn't sure if it was the same Gerald I knew so many years ago, my son's best friend. But something told me it was. I kept the clipping, but didn't have the courage to seek you out at the time. Then, a few weeks ago, I saw an advertisement for this restaurant, The Fisherman, and the names of the owners, Dorothy and Diana. Two unusual names together. I knew it couldn't be a coincidence. I discreetly called a waiter and asked him to fetch Diana from the kitchen. She came quickly, concerned about my expression. This is Mr. August Wilson, I introduced, watching her pale as she heard the surname. Gregory's father. Diana sat with us, as perplexed as I was. Mr. Wilson observed us with an expression that mixed curiosity and sadness. So you discovered then, he said, not as a question, but as a statement about Gerald's double life. We nodded in silence. He continued, his voice now lower, heavier. Gregory and Gerald were inseparable since they were boys. They grew up together in this region. They would go fishing at the river every Sunday. When my son died in that stupid accident, a flat tire on the curve of the state highway, Gerald was devastated. He attended the funeral, of course, but afterward, he disappeared for weeks. When he returned, he was different, more reserved, more divided. He paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. A few weeks after the funeral, he came to visit me. He said something that at the time I didn't fully understand. He said that as long as he fished with Gregory on Sundays, my son would remain alive. I thought it was just a poetic way of expressing grief, of keeping his friend's memory alive. Diana and I exchanged a look. It wasn't poetry. It was the beginning of an elaborate illusion that would last decades. Did you know about the two families? Diana cautiously asked. He shook his head. Not directly, no, but I suspected there was something strange in his life. Years after the accident, I ran into Gerald by chance in Riverdale. He was with a woman and a small child and introduced himself as August. I was confused, but before I could question, he pulled me aside and begged me not to contradict him. He said he would explain everything later. He never did. Another heavy silence settled between us. Mr. Wilson sighed deeply before continuing. A few times in the following years, I saw August with his family in Riverdale. We would greet each other from a distance, but never properly talked. I respected his apparent desire to keep his lives separate, although I never fully understood it. When I learned of his death, many old questions resurfaced. And now, seeing you two together, I think I finally understand. Diana served water for everyone, her hands slightly trembling. I took a sip, trying to organize my thoughts. You said Gerald was devastated by Gregory's death, I commented. Do you think that's what triggered everything? The creation of this double life? Mr. Wilson reflected for a moment. My son and Gerald had a friendship that went beyond the ordinary. They shared everything, dreams, fears, secrets. Gregory was the only one with whom Gerald could be completely himself. When he lost him, I think something broke inside him, as if a part of himself had died too, the part that was free, authentic. His words echoed what we had found in the diary. a divided man, unable to integrate the different facets of his personality into a single life. He used your name, Diana said softly, for his other identity, August. Mr. Wilson smiled sadly. Yes, I realize that. Perhaps it was a form of homage, or perhaps it was easier to build a new identity from something familiar, something close to Gregory. We talked for almost an hour. Mr. Wilson told us stories of Gerald and Gregory in their youth, two mischievous children who became dreamy teenagers, how they had planned to open a business together someday, perhaps an inn by the river, where they could fish daily, how Gregory was the bold one, the adventurer, while Gerald was the cautious one, the planner. It's ironic, he said at one point. The restaurant you created is very much like what they dreamed of. By the roadside, near the river, a place for travelers to rest and eat well. We had never thought of that. The fisherman wasn't just the reframing of Gerald's lie. It was in a way the realization of his youthful dream, the dream that had died with Gregory. When Mr. Wilson finally said goodbye, he left us with a wooden box. I found this among Gregory's belongings after the accident. I never had the courage to give it to Gerald. Perhaps now you can make better use of it. Inside the box was an old notebook, yellowed by time, with Gregory's handwriting, different from Gerald's, but with the same flowery style in certain letters, as if they had learned to write together. It was a fishing diary from 1963 to 1965, each Sunday meticulously noted. The weather, the bait used, the fish caught, the conversations, the shared dreams. In the last entry, dated 1 week before the accident, Gregory had written, Gerald confessed something surprising today. He said sometimes he feels he's living the wrong life, that he made decisions based on what others expected of him, not what he really wanted. He talked about the pharmacy, the young marriage, the responsibilities that suffocate him. If he could start over, he said, he would live in a completely different way. I tried to cheer him up, tell him it's never too late to change, but he just smiled in that sad way. Some of us are born to live one life faithfully, he replied. Others might need several lives to be who they truly are. I'm not sure what he meant by that, but I felt a deep sadness in his words. We closed the notebook in silence, deeply touched. It was as if we had found the final piece of the puzzle, the origin of the fracture that would lead Gerald to build a double life after losing the only friend with whom he could be authentic. That night, after all the customers had left and our children had helped with the cleaning, Diana and I sat on the back porch of the restaurant, contemplating the starry sky, each with our thoughts. You know what's strange? She commented finally. All this time I imagined Gerald, August, as a calculating liar, a cold manipulator. But now we see a broken man, I completed, someone who couldn't be whole in a single life. This doesn't justify what he did, she said firmly. No, it doesn't, I agreed, but perhaps it helps to understand. We were silent again, the distant sound of the river as a backdrop for our thoughts. It was strange to realize how gradually the initial anger had transformed into something more complex, not exactly forgiveness, but a deeper understanding of human fragility, of our capacity to lose ourselves in our own lies. What will we do with Gregory's diary? Diana asked. I thought for a moment. I think we should keep it together with Gerald's diary. They are two parts of the same story. One day, perhaps our grandchildren will want to understand this strange story that united our families. The following months were of intense work. The fishermen quickly gained a reputation in the region for its excellent food and welcoming atmosphere. We expanded the menu, hired more staff, even started serving dinners on Fridays and Saturdays, in addition to the traditional lunches. Selling my house in Pine Creek was a difficult decision, but necessary. We built a small apartment above the restaurant where I came to live. Diana did the same, selling her apartment in Riverdale. We lived on opposite sides of the same building, separated enough to maintain our privacy, close enough for the convenience of work. Our children, initially reluctant, grew closer over time. Janet and Teresa developed a surprising friendship despite their different personalities. Martha eventually softened her combative stance and began helping on busier weekends. Joshua and Eugene maintained contact from a distance, exchanging professional advice and, occasionally, stories about the father they both discovered they had never completely known. In 1999, we expanded the business, adding a small inn next to the restaurant. Just 5 simple but comfortable rooms for travelers passing along the highway. It was exactly what Gerald and Gregory had dreamed of decades before. In the years that followed, the Fisherman became not just a prosperous business, but a symbol of our unusual story. Eventually, Diana and I became friends, not best friends, not intimate confidants, but life companions who shared a singular past and built an unexpected future together. In 2004, at 74, I began to think about reducing my work pace. Diana, 2 years younger, felt the same. Our children were established in their own lives with their families. It was time to think about the succession of the business. To our surprise, it was Janet and Martha who expressed interest in taking over the management of the restaurant and the inn. 2 half-sisters who never knew of each other's existence until their father's death, now planning to continue the legacy we had built from the ashes of his lie. Today, at 78, I look back and see an extraordinary journey. From the confident housewife who believed she had a perfect marriage, to the widow devastated by the discovery of betrayal, to the businesswoman who found a new identity and purpose in middle age. If someone had told me on that day I found the box in the garage that the greatest betrayal of my life would also become my greatest opportunity for a fresh start, I would never have believed it. Often people ask me if I forgave Gerald. It's a complex question. I can't say I forgot or that the pain completely disappeared, but over time I learned to see beyond the betrayal, to see the broken man behind the lies, someone who perhaps never learned to be authentic after losing the only friend with whom he could be himself. And if there's a lesson I learned in this whole journey, it's that it's never too late to reinvent yourself. At 67, when many people already retreat to a quiet retirement, I found a new version of myself, stronger, more independent, more complete than I ever was as Gerald's wife. Diana taught me a lot about courage and adaptability. Together we transformed the greatest pain of our lives into something productive, meaningful. Not for him, not to preserve his memory, but for ourselves, to prove that we are more than the women he deceived. The Fisherman continues to prosper under the management of Janet and Martha. Occasionally, I still help at the cash register or greet special customers. Diana sometimes prepares her famous halibut for special occasions. Our grandchildren grow up knowing this shared story, learning that families can take unexpected forms, that bonds can be forged even in the most unlikely circumstances. And sometimes on quiet nights, Diana and I sit on the back porch, looking at the stars, listening to the distant river, and feel a strange gratitude. Not for the lie we lived, not for the betrayal we suffered, but for the strength we discovered, for the unlikely friendship we built, for the life we rediscovered when everything seemed lost. As I always tell my grandchildren, life rarely follows the script we plan. The greatest challenges can become the greatest opportunities, and it is never, ever too late to begin again. Thank you for accompanying me on this journey, my dears. I hope my story has touched your hearts and perhaps inspired someone who is facing their own challenges. If you liked it, don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share with someone who might need to hear that there is always a new beginning waiting for us, no matter our age or circumstances. Until the next video, from wherever you're watching.